Good afternoon and welcome to May's instalment of the L&D Fix. Thank you for joining us live here on LinkedIn or for catching up with us later on in the recording. Joining me today is Cathy Hoy from CLO100. Cathy, thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with us today.
No, not at all. Thank you for inviting. It's great to be here. I was just getting carried away watching that intro jingle. I thought that was brilliant.
It's good, isn't it? It's all feeling very snazzy. I'll go back and watch the first one after this and see how far we've come. No, really fantastic work from the team at Thirst there. So today's session then, we are diving into what really was the number one challenge when we looked at the State of L&D report earlier this year, leadership development. Really interesting, really expansive topic. And we'd really like you to get involved in the chat as we discuss it. We're going to be diving into maybe why it filled that number one spot, why it's so challenging and perhaps hasn't always been as effective as we'd like it to be, and what really good leadership development looks like in the real world. So share your thoughts, share your questions, but most importantly, jump in there now and tell us, what is it that you're working on in the world of leadership development right now? Is it a priority in your organization? Cathy, before we dive into that, and just in case anyone here isn't familiar with yourself, could you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you think it is that when this topic came up, we were like, we need to get Cathy for this conversation?
I'm CEO and co-founder at CLO100, and if anyone's not come across CLO100 before, we essentially develop and connect senior L&D leaders. We do that through programs like our Learning Leaders program. We do it through community membership and experience assessments, and also through events, whether they're kind of small gatherings or kind of bigger, more strategic. I suppose I spend probably a lot of my time listening to what's happening in organizations. And this year, leadership development is definitely up there. Is a business essential and necessity. I suppose I'd probably counter that with the other challenge we're seeing a lot of, which is no one having any budgets to do anything to kind of meet that challenge. But yeah, that's kind of what we're hearing a lot at the moment.
Amazing. And I think what really sort of strikes me about this topic is how, when I was reading the report, I was prepared to see one thing and one thing only really in the top spot. It takes the top spot of like every report at the moment is what's the challenge? It's AI. And without getting into the is AI a challenge or not argument, this was really interesting to see people almost moving beyond that, maybe the cause of challenges as opposed to a challenge itself, and instead zooming in on a human challenge being top of the list, which was really quite refreshing. And I wondered from your perspective, and again, anyone who's in the chat, please feel free to chime in and share your thoughts on this question. Why is it that you think right now, with everything going on, all the, there are tons of priorities. Everything's a priority, as we know, and it all needed to be done yesterday. Why would leadership development end up right at the top?
I mean, I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on this in chat, definitely. It might vary slightly across industries, but I think it's definitely being seen, and I don't know why it was ever seen as this, but it's definitely stopped being seen as a kind of nice to have. It definitely seems to be seen more as a kind of survival skill for most businesses now. So I think leadership has probably got the place, or leadership development has probably got to the kind of place it deserves, to be fair, in that kind of hierarchy of priorities. I think with AI, that's obviously having an impact, but I think as AI is handling all the, I don't know, what would you say, like the doing stuff, execution work, the skills that can't be automated, or can't yet be automated, are probably really increasing in value. So as you alluded to, human skills like coaching, decision-making, empathy, accountability, and I think those are becoming more and more valuable. So I think value is kind of shifted from what people do to how they lead and how they make decisions, how they coach, how they create conditions for high performance. So it's become really, really a high priority. And even if you zoom out a bit from that and look at it at a kind of macro content, we're sort of looking at it from macro context all the time, actually, and it's something that we tend to speak to our members and cohorts about. You've got all sorts of things happening in the world. Yes, AI, but also an overwhelming amount of volatility. The fact that we all need to do more with less, fragmented workplaces, uncertainty. I mean, you could just go on. I remember years ago, we used to talk about VUCA as the kind of framework we'd hang on to. And now it's all about BANI, which I think it describes the current situation incredibly well, brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. And that pretty much applies to everything going on in the world right now. And, leaders are being asked to deliver transformation, manage constant change, care for the well-being of the team. So yeah, that makes leadership a real, I suppose, like a hard performance, believer, not just a soft skill. And we all know leadership is expensive. People leave. So good leadership becomes a bit of a retention strategy, I think.
I think it's some really interesting stuff in there. And I came across an interview when I was I always like to think about these things before we come and have these conversations. What are the new ideas out there? And I came across an interview with, I'm sure they were a very famous tech CEO. They're probably a billionaire. I don't know. But they seemed very confident in their opinion, unheard of, I know. But they were basically putting forward the argument that in the future, leaders who are people leaders will not have a job, and that you have to be a people and technology leader to have a place in the future of work. And it really struck me as like, one, that's quite a bold thing to say. Like, I know now we're kind of all aware that technology is really important, but to say that there's no space for just, what do you do? I manage people. I'm not a domain expert. My job here is to get the most out of these other people. Was quite an interesting shift, because we spent a long time saying managers don't have to always be the domain expert. Sometimes they could be fantastic managers, fantastic leaders, but are not the best person at, I don't know, I'll use an L&D thing. They might not be the best instructional designer on the team, but they might be a fantastic head of L&D. Almost like those two things are different roles. Who knows? What are your thoughts on kind of how that might change? And it might, because none of us can see the future, right? But like, I think recently at one of your breakfasts, I think it was Helen talking about like agents joining the business. And how do you see the kind of leadership role in all of that?
Yeah, wow, what a question. That's I mean, and actually Helen's a great place to start. So Helen Marshall at booking.com. She sort of mentioned actually the transition of her L&D team was going to be a combination of, human and AI agent, which obviously is a really interesting topic, and we're all kind of, wanting to dig in and probe. And then I believe it was Phil that asked the question, where do you see that AI going? I think oh God, really good question. Like, hadn't thought about that actually. And that's a really big thing. So I think looking at it from that HR and L&D perspective, we have the same question. So it wouldn't surprise me that we need to think about that from a general leadership and management perspective as well. It does feel weird these days that we have to, I suppose, even reference human skills and human behaviors, but we kind of do. I think that we're going to have to get used to the fact that it's yet another change. It's something else for managers, but ultimately I do think it probably should be something that we all need to learn to do. I think if you look at the model, is it Atlassian? I think they're an Australian company, one of the first organizations to combine HR transformation into the CPO role. And I think that's a really big step, but I think equally it's really important, because if you just keep AI in the tech sort of domain, that's not going to help anyone. A lot of it is driven by behavioral change, and the need for leadership skills in that space. So it probably makes sense that those things are combined to an extent.
It's tricky. I think it's such a fundamental change, and yet not like it's fundamental and yet kind of an extension of what great leaders do anyway. Because it's interesting to talk about sort of why this has come top. And initially my thinking was, with all this going on, with all this change, why would this be top priority? But I've realized that perhaps one is kind of feeding the other. with all this change, is the kind of ability for an organization to weather or move with change tied up in the effectiveness of their leaders, do you think?
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. I think the thing is, it's all, the pressure's always sat with leaders, really. I mean, particularly that kind of middle management space. I think that's really, really challenging. It always has been, and it has been with every new thing that's implemented. But AI can't really be, I don't think AI can be talked about in the same sort of bracket as other change that we've implemented in business. Much bigger. This is, the industrial revolution on steroids. This is kind of huge. We can't just say, oh, it's a new bit of tech we've got to get used to. Or leaders have got a role in, I don't know, LMS implementation. This is a lot bigger. This is going to change how all of us work at some point, whether we like it or not. I think probably for the good and for the bad in some cases. Look, it's a lot of pressure for leaders, and honestly, right now, I'm quite thankful I'm not in a corporate having to manage a massive global team. I do think it's a really big challenge. I have to say, I think the kind of leadership and technical kind of side should work hand in hand with each other, but we definitely need kind of human and behavioral skills to make sure things like that land.
Absolutely. So I guess we're probably on the same page about kind of the importance of leadership, but leadership development's not a new concept. Like, leadership development training has been around for quite a while. For those of us who remember getting your first management role and being handed a pile of Ken Blanchard books and being told that the 1 minute manager will see you through most difficult conversations you have in your first management role, and then realizing that whilst this lovely situational leadership model makes perfect sense on the page, in the real world, it kind of falls apart a bit. Because you haven't got a few minutes to analyze where someone is on this curve before you respond to them screaming in your face. It's maybe I just manage very difficult people early on, but I think management development training has not always achieved what it set out to do. Leaders are nothing new. We've had leaders for a long time. We've had bad leaders for a long time. We've also had good leaders along with them, of course. So what is it that you think makes so much leadership development training so, I would argue, ineffective? And I guess, would you agree with that? Would you agree? Because it's only my view.
I totally agree. I think a lot of it is ineffective. I don't think it's necessarily just a lot of leadership training. I think a lot of training generally is ineffective because we're still using very old, outdated kind of delivery models, to be honest. But typically with leadership, I think you probably see it more than anywhere else, that leaders are either taken away a boot camp, or they've got essentially development is aligned to what consists of, I don't know, a flow of formal training courses and programs, and that's sort of pretty much where it ends. There's not really much performance support. There's no social learning tied into it. It really kind of fit in the day-to-day. I'm really desperately trying not to use the term in the flow of work. So I think a lot of it, probably that it's probably seeing it as a training solution, and leadership development's far broader than that.
I think this is probably the challenge, right? Is the time surely is I don't know. We often talk about how much time people don't have when they're on the job, which we tend to, perhaps incorrectly, exclude leaders from. We think of the average employee being on the job, and we often talk about managers and leaders especially, being over the job or overseeing or being outside the usual kind of working production flows of most organizations. And it is allowing for the fact that actually their time is not only probably under more pressure than we might always consider, but also actually just costs more. Just in terms of what they are paid per minute, per hour, per whatever in the business, the cost of those interventions is inherently quite large and therefore carry much greater risk. I'll come to the chat in a minute because I can see we've got some great comments coming through. But I guess when you see these initiatives being put in place, are those kind of some of the challenges that you're seeing them have, or are there other kind of misconceptions, I guess, when people are trying to create leadership development programs?
No, I think that's fair. There's always the challenge with the leadership role in that you're not just there to lead. It's a real shame, actually. I think if organisations realise the value and the positive financial impact of allowing leaders to lead, they'd be a lot better off. But leaders often have the job to do as well. So and you see this play out actually really probably in an easier way to articulate in a sales space, where you've got the kind of player coach. So you've got someone leading a sales team, and actually they're leading that team. They're supposed to be supporting the team, coaching the team, helping the team to progress and get more sales, but also they've got sales targets themselves. So they have to sell. They can't just be helping the team, but yet actually the value of them helping the team would mean ultimately the team sold more. So it's a real dilemma, I think. And most businesses, leaders are not just left to lead and to remove blockers. And, because if that's what your job was day in, day out, it would be amazing. We'd have much more effective organizations. If that literally was the role of the leader, remove boom. That would be great, but it's just, it never is. So every leader's also got a kind of, and when you take people out and go, here you go, you've got a 3-day training program now, and in a month's time you've got another 3-day training program, so you're going to be out, and actually when you return to work there's nothing to really integrate what you've learned at all. You just have to kind of get on with it, and we hope that you're putting everything into practice. So it feels it's not very supported, it's not very connected. I think the lack of social learning often is a big issue, and connecting with peers and learning from each other. I think that's actually a really big challenge, and actually, that's a really good solution, particularly when you don't have budget, is to look at maximising the kind of social learning aspect.
So do you think that kind of, maybe not the utopian version of leaders just lead all the time, everywhere, at every level, but do you think there is an opportunity in some or many organizations to do that? And if so, why do you think so? Because I imagine some organizations probably do that. I couldn't give you a list. I'll be honest, I've yet to see one. But do you think it's a possibility, and what do you think might be blocking more organizations moving in that direction, at least, even if they don't fully adopt that approach?
Gosh. I suppose part of it is probably an awareness. It doesn't feel like maybe that's a job for a lot of people. If you don't have kind of core tactical and operational KPIs to meet, is it really a job? I don't know. So it might be a little bit of that. I think the fact that everybody's feeling very time poor, it probably contributes to that, because they feel there needs to be pulling their weight. Everyone needs to be seen to contribute to the targets. And I think it's a lot easier to say to someone, here you go, you do X, Y, and Z, that helps us get to the targets, rather than just saying, could you develop your team to make sure that they can work more effectively, and can you remove the blockers and challenges so that they can get on with their jobs? I think it's probably more tangible. So there might be a bit of that. I think, there definitely are some businesses that do it more than, I don't think 100%. I don't think I've ever seen that, but there are definitely more organisations, I think, and probably in more industries where that's encouraged a lot more, and to have that more coach role really as a leader, and to remove yourself from a lot of the kind of doing, I suppose. But I think it's probably a combination of maybe not being aware of the importance of doing that, the ease of being able to link more tactical work to sort of KPIs and things that you can really easily measure, and potentially the fact that everyone's so time poor. I think it's just quicker and easier to say, right, everybody just does this, and we all jump in and kind of get on with it. But the impact on teams particularly as well, it's not just the leader, the impact on the team when they haven't got a leader that can spend time with them and coach them and help them is huge. You kind of need that support, particularly in maybe sort of smaller to medium-sized businesses. It's really crucial.
No, I agree, because being realistic, the reach and potential impact of small and medium organizations' L&D departments is inherently limited. by budget, by numbers, by resource. So enable, having great managers who can coach, support, help make change happen in the organization post workshop or e-learning or away day or whatever is crucial. And the thing that really struck me there is that from thinking about leadership development programs that I've been involved in, I'm not convinced we ever did a good enough job of articulating how we were going to measure and prove the impact of successful leaders into the business beyond, as you say, kind of the existing operational KPIs. I'm thinking, did we try and prove the link and say, hey, look, these managers demonstrated these behaviors and we then saw this uplift in team performance? Did we make that link strong enough to kind of sell this to the business as being important? Or did we just kind of trust on them taking our word for it that great leaders lead to great results? Because it's sort of one of those truisms, and we didn't evidence that enough. Could that be why so often these programs get slashed or cut back or reduced or never made in the first place? We've got a huge comment come through, and it starts with, I'm currently rolling out a pilot, which makes me very happy. Yes, well done for running a pilot. Don't care about the rest of it. You're running a pilot. That's great news. A pilot program with my company called the Leadership Academy. Cool. The aim is to support colleagues who are new to leadership, aspiring to move into leadership roles, or simply looking to further develop and sharpen their leadership capabilities. One thing that really surprised me whilst researching and building the program was the number of accidental leaders who step into leadership positions without ever receiving any formal leadership training, myself included. You can count me amongst that as well. I was made a manager at 21 and had no right managing anyone, let alone myself at that point. It reinforced how important it is to create opportunities that help people build confidence, self-awareness, and practical leadership skills early in their journey. The biggest obstacle for me is senior leadership buy-in, but I have created multiple delivery methods to allow for time constraints or attention issues. Well, thank you for sharing so much. That sounds like a really cool program. Let's talk about the challenge: senior leader buy-in to leadership development. Surely they should hear this and be like, "That's for me. Amazing! Something that actually supports me." But senior leader buy-in, how do we go about that? Because at the highest level, let's say we're talking about going to the board, we're not typically great at that. What would your observations or ideas be, Cathy?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, Aaron, sounds great. And again, agree with Tom. I mean, love the pilot approach. I think everything needs to be a pilot, really, but particularly something like that. But it sounds great what you're doing. I think start from the problem. So we have to start from the business problem. So why are we doing it? We're not just rolling out leadership training because we woke up one day and thought, oh, I haven't got enough to do. I'm going to do that. What is it? Missed targets, poor engagement, slow decisions, people leaving the organization, whatever. Understand where you're starting. And that's honestly the easiest way to start to get buy-in with the leadership team. People in L&D often talk about ROI, return on investment. I'm not against ROI investment, but honestly, it takes a very long time and it's really difficult to demonstrate, to be honest, because there's always so much else going on in the business, particularly these days. But also when you're trying to get buy-in, or most importantly, sign off, usually for budget, ROI is like something you can just say to the C-suite, yeah, and then we're going to have, this ROI, and this is what I think we're going to have. And people go, oh, sounds amazing. No one ever really follows up on it. And after the project, the spend, whatever has happened, people kind of forget to ask for it, or they do ask for it and no one can really calculate it anyway. So I think that actually, rather than return on investment, focus on COI, the cost of inaction. So this is why you're starting from the business problem. So you're working out why there's a problem right now, how much you think that problem is, and all have to be, financial data and metrics. Would say if you're trying to convince a C-suite, it's usually the best place to start. But you can also have a look at the cost behaviorally as well. So I think starting in that space, so what's the cost of not doing this? And then essentially what you're asking the business to do is to say, yes, we're happy with that. We're happy to carry on as we are with those problems and with that expense and with that cost. And they're unlikely to do that. So you're much more likely to get some kind of movement in a positive direction towards your project or your request if you go with, what the situation is now and what is costing us.
I really like that, because I think a lot of people that I speak to are quite nervous as well about predicting ROI, because there is that concern of predicting the future is a tricky business. Like 10 years ago, I wrote an article saying SCORM is dead. Egg on my face, it's still kicking about. It's in fact, it's still everywhere. The future is tough, whereas if you can define the problem now, I really like that. It made me think as well, way back at the start of this series, I think 2 years ago at this point, we did an episode with Greg Arthur, and he spoke about creating problem statements. So if that's something you want to try, that would be a great episode to go back and watch, because we do a really nice step through of how to define and communicate a problem clearly. Understanding it is great, but being able to clearly explain it to others, as we all know, that's the key, right?
Yeah.
Really great stuff. We've got loads of fantastic comments coming in. I really want to dive into some of these. Jed, a really good one earlier. Who trains the leadership trainers? This is a systemic issue with a systemic cause and systemic solution. That's a really good challenge, because I'll use myself as an example. The first time I was ever asked to put together some leadership training, it was, here's the book. The business would like to train people on the contents of this book. It was Who Moved My Cheese? If anyone remembers that, when that was everywhere. Great story, funny little animation, good story about needing to adapt to things changing over time. But I had no idea what I was doing. I basically took the book and went, I don't know, how do we put this into a training room for half a day? And then I stood at the front, everyone went, cool, what have you led? And I said, oh, well, this project. That was about it. So not very helpful. But I speak to a lot of people in that same boat. So from your perspective, Cathy, who should be involved in the early stages of defining what leadership development, not to say training, but initiatives or support should and needs to exist in an organization?
Gosh, again, it's going to kind of vary, and it also, some organizations are quite wedded to certain models, frameworks, and things like that. Some individuals are wedded to some as well. It does depend. I think if you've got a particular, a recognized framework or process or model you want to go through, I do think it's worth the proper investment in getting your trainers trained externally with a certified company that's able to do that. But honestly, that's really if you're going down the formal training route. And I don't think you have to go down the formal training route. It gets expensive. And honestly, given the situation with most people's budgets right now, I just don't think it's practical. I think we need to look at more kind of day-to-day interventions, things that don't cost a fortune, things that are a lot easier to set up. And actually, okay, yes, the L&D leader definitely needs to be involved in that. Usually they'll have an awful lot of experience anyway. They've moved from probably company to company, but also speak to your existing leadership team, speak to the people, involve the people that are doing all the people that get amazing feedback, the people whose teams don't leave them, the people that are really contributing positively in the leadership space in your organization, and involve them. They should be more than stakeholders. They can be, co-creators of what really good leadership looks like. And that's leaving the training aside, just really good leadership looks like. And then you kind of work from there. But there's definitely a lot more you can do than, formal training. And I think whilst, okay, it's hard to probably quantify the outputs of the informal stuff. And I think we're obsessed with, the formal outputs in learning development. I would say in all the organizations I've worked for, from, I don't know, to Tesco to Soho House, no one in the C-suite has ever said to me, I need to see that data. I need to see, how many people are being trained. I need to see what the pre and post training scores were. I need to understand. They're not looking for that. What they're looking for is how are we contributing to business performance. And that's really the only thing that matters. And I think if you can do that through more informal approaches, which are going to be easier to set up and maintain and adopt, then we do that. But I do think if you're going to go down the formal training route, it's often advisable to work with, one of the kind of big external agencies to get your trainers trained. Look, from our perspective, we work with L&D leaders, but we develop them in more leadership and commercial acumen skills. So it's not here's a leadership framework you need to know to go and deliver to your business. It's how do we get you boardroom ready? So we sort of focus on that angle. But I think from the practical stuff, then you'll probably want to go to recognised leadership organisations, I suppose, that are already out there. I mean, who moved my cheese? I think we all know that well.
Is the iceberg melting still? That was another one. There's some phenomenal books written in what I can only assume to be having smoked something.
Quite possibly. And look, most companies we work with are already really, really wedded to a formal leadership development approach, actually, and there's not an awful lot you could do. I mean, apart from obviously sort of say, well, let's scaffold that with some more on the job ideas, but actually they've already got what it is they do, and that's been integrated and embedded into the DNA of their organization. So far be it from us to suggest changing it. But yeah, look, it's important. It's absolutely important, and I think it's a really good question. It's definitely something people need to think about. You don't just want to be, I mean, to your point, it's almost the accidental leader. You don't want to be in an L&D position where someone says, right, we need to be wholly responsible for rolling this out, and no one's actually trained them. That could be damaging.
Definitely. So I'm glad you mentioned some of the stuff that you cover. So like the business acumen side of things, because this is a side of leadership development that I'm always fascinated by, because in most organizations you get a lot on really important stuff, difficult conversations, the well-being of your team, having a vision, communicating, all these kinds of things. Very rarely internally do I see you need to understand the financial and global position of the organization in which you are leading. Very rarely do you see, at the C-suite, there tends to be an inherent, that's the job. But from every level below that, very few people, I feel, if you say, oh, so what does the company balance sheet look like? Would they even know what, where to go for that, or what that meant to them, or how to read it? And I don't know why that is. So I guess my first question is, do you feel like that's something that sub C-suite, lower down in the organization, leaders should be thinking about and should be taking in as part of their role? And if yes, how do we go about building that up? Because it's not a skill set I think is very common within any organization.
Yes, immediately. I think everybody needs to know a lot more. I think more commercialness in the organization, any level, is really important. And I'd say not even stopping there at leadership levels. I think the more people that are aware of how their individual role contributes to the rest of the organization, the better. The more committed, engaged they are to staying with the organization, the more sort of bought into what the organization does. But also it educates them as well, and it's going to help them as they progress, if they want to progress throughout the organization through their leadership position. So when they find themselves as an accidental leader, at least they might have some kind of commercial acumen to help them on their way. But so I think there's obviously there's formal stuff. There's always going to be formal stuff. I will just exclude that formal training out there, because we all know that that's there. I think one of the biggest things you can do is actually spend time with different departments. So spend time with the departments that do know about it. Spend time with your teams, your commercial teams, spend time with the finance team, really understand things like it. Well, okay, so here's a thought. People don't need to answer this, by the way, in chat, but just think about it. So do you know what's on your L&D strategy? If you know what's on your L&D strategy, do you know what's on your wider HR people strategy? And I mean everything. If you know that, do you know what's on your organization strategy, the whole thing? So I would challenge everyone to just think about that, because most people I ask do not know what's on the organizational strategy. They'll know the people pillar sometimes, they'll know the L&D strategy, but actually the wider strategy and goals of the organization for the next 2 to 3 years, people don't know. So I think understanding that is really helpful, and it should be fairly easy to get hold of in your organization. I think understanding the strategy is one thing, but also looking at the next 6 months priorities, because that's often a little bit different. Then you've got really practical stuff like understanding I kind of, from a macro level, look at macro external factors. So what are the headwinds and tailwinds? So think about headwinds. Those are things to overcome. So those are literally, think of a headwind, it's literally going to, knock you over. So what are the things to overcome? It could be economic uncertainty, cost of living crisis, supply chain disruptions, anything like that. And what are the tailwinds? They're going to amplify what the business is doing. So there might be a growing demand for XYZ, or e-commerce growth, which is going to massively help your organization. I think find out those things as well is going to help you feel a lot more informed in terms of what your organization does, how it's impacted, and then look at the commercial drivers. And your CFO FD will be able to help you with this, but it's kind of how we make money. And it's not just, we make money because we sell things. It's okay, funds coming in might be through increased e-commerce sales, it might be through loyalty program revenue growth. Money going out could be, actually, we've got really big supply chain costs or logistics costs. It's not just cost of product creation that's an issue. It could be actually that technology over the next 10 years, 2 years, whatever, are going to cost us a fortune. So actually that's a real challenge. So I think just kind of working with the right people in the organization to understand a bit more about the commercial side of the business is valuable for anyone.
That's really interesting, because I must admit, when you said about taking it like even beyond leaders, I sort of thought, you know what, there's no way until I was kind of leading a lot of people that I even thought about it. But as an employee, I did not consider our strategy really much of anything to do with me, because it felt very distant. It was something that got trotted out by someone when they go, we've got to meet our, whatever it was, proud to be blue targets for the year. And I sit there going, okay, yeah, you work harder is what you're saying. Okay, cracker. But perhaps a deeper understanding might have made that a bit more of a positive experience, perhaps. That's really
yeah. I mean, it would be great if schools. I mean, I won't go down this route, Tom, because I'll be on a rant. But it would be great if schools could prepare kids more for real commercial challenges, just
life.
Life would really help. But understanding more about businesses, how businesses work, rather than kind of I say current, because it's been a while since I've been at school, but from what I believe is still being taught in the classroom, that would be the first step. But I don't see why we shouldn't embed that into people's development when they join an organization at whatever level. I can only see that that's helpful. I mean, you interestingly, I started in retail, and you are very aware in retail because you're given targets, and you also understand where your merchandise comes from, and you have to sometimes liaise with the head office, and then you get an idea of what next year's product range is going to be. And so you are, I think you're exposed in some kind of retail situations to some of that quite early on, but I appreciate a lot of industries you're not, and even in a lot of retail you're not, but I don't see the harm in exposing people early on.
No, I really like that. The first organisation I ended up managing in was very similar. It's a sales environment, so everyone knew their numbers. You knew your weekly, your monthly, your quarterly. You knew the store contribution target, because that's what you were going to be paid on or not. I guess you can only pay someone based on something if they understand it, right? So I think we're probably quite a commercially aware bunch there. But no, really interesting. So I want to start. Actually, a really good point to come in that I'll pick up in a moment about reflection. But I want to start hoving on. So practically speaking, we've talked a lot about, why this is important, and maybe some of the skills involved, and why perhaps historically leadership development training has not always gone quite as well as we want it to, and what some of the blockers are. So let's start talking about what really good leadership development I'm going to use the word initiatives, because it may not be training. It may be anything we might be able to do. What does that look like? Alistair sent in, research shows the biggest impact on leadership development is experience combined with reflective practice. Think about how to build experience and scaffold with reflective opportunity. Now, I know you do a lot of this, Cathy. So talk to us about how, it's very easily said. It's not quite, that easy, I would argue, in most organizations. So how do you go about creating those experiences where you give those leaders some time to reflect on their practice?
I love the reflection piece. That's a great question, Alistair, or a great statement, actually. So yes, reflection, vitally important. When we first launched our Learning Leaders program, we worked with, well, we still do, we partner with Leeds University Business School. And one of the things that they said, which we would have done anyway, but it kind of made us really think about it, was, look, the program needs to have an element of reflection built in. And we were like, well, of course, we'll absolutely make sure that happens. Don't worry. But they're like, no, we want submitted statements, reflection statements. And I thought, oh, okay, all right, quite like this. So we started working with our cohort and structuring what the reflection statements could look like. So really so essentially we deliver things in modules, and there's different workshops, there's group coaching built in, there's online stuff, there's a whole lot of stuff that makes up a module. And at the end of each module, we asked them to submit a written reflection statement. So they'd think about what they'd learned, they'd think about how they've been able to apply it, what the challenges were, what worked, what didn't, stuff like that. And that was useful. We then ran a kind of webinar where everyone had a bit of a check-in, and we'd actually talk through some of those reflections and go, okay, but how did that work for you? And why did that work for you and not you? And then people could share their experiences with each other. So again, that social learning piece is crucial, not only in the learning phase, but in the reflection phase, which helps cement the learning. But with this year's cohort, we are working with the wonderful team at StoryTagger, which are giving us a whole new way of doing this. So StoryTagger, for anyone that doesn't know, essentially is like a video-based reflective tool that really works well within leadership development programs and anything that's like cohort-driven. But it's absolutely fantastic because all our cohorts get access to each other's videos. So even from the introduction video, it's, here's a bit about me. You can kind of put prompts within the video and set it up like that. So you're asking the questions you want answered. And then what we've done is embedded that across the modules. So then people can reflect via video practice, and then it gets shared within that kind of cohort community. So everyone sees each other's learning and hears the learning from each other. But equally, the AI working behind it is then kind of trawling all of that to give us the data throughout the program at the end of the program, saying, this is where you're meeting the program expectations. This is where you might need to adjust here, or some people this and not this. So it's taken it to a whole new level for us, actually. But even without that, I think the idea of some sort of structured reflection is, vitally important. But I would say the bit that brings it to life is the social piece. So it's learners being able to reflect with others, not just in isolation.
I think that's I mean, the social practice is going to be kind of my follow-up question of how do we build that in. But just on there, going from written to video, that's really fascinating, because I think, like, for a long time I tried to get people to do written reflection statements. And I think for a lot of people it was, why are you asking me to write a little essay for you? It felt very back to schooly, which it says a lot that we have such an innately negative response to being told to do something that we feel is it's going back to school. What does that tell us about how we think there? But despite all the evidence to say that's super effective, really helpful, will make your reflection stick, all this sort of stuff. So with the move to video, have you seen, did you see a lot of resistance? Because I guess this is one thing, this could be audience specific. Did you see any resistance or people struggling to write that's gone with moving to video? Or is the major difference that ability to capture and analyze using the AI, which again, you could do in writing, but I suspect would be, not quite as seamless, right?
I think, we had certainly in our very first cohort, we had a couple of people who struggled a little bit more with the written submissions. One person was dyslexic, as I am, so I, would always think twice about having to do a really long, submission. I think that was 1, 2, 3. Was that 3? I can't actually work out. 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. And I suppose if I look at where AI is now as well, I think if it was a written reflection, some people could outsource that, maybe. I'm not saying learning leaders would, clearly, but I think there's probably the temptation as going through a program and you see that reflective piece is hard work and you don't understand the value in it. It's pretty easy these days to get AI to write it. Whereas actually the video, it's a little real. It feels very genuine, and actually, we didn't see any resistance to it. Well, a couple of people obviously initially thinking, "Oh my god, this sounds scary," but they jumped straight in. And I think when you're in a cohort and that's been nurtured and you feel safe in that cohort, then you kind of get into it quite quickly, actually, especially if you role model it yourself. And I hate doing those things, but if you jump in and do it yourself as well, I think people are much more likely to get on with it.
Amazing. Just before we move on to that, I want to talk about the cohorts and the social learning stuff, but just really quickly, Peter's comment there about it's a great use of AI to analyze this stuff, but we've got to be careful around kind of neurodivergent people and other groups who maybe it's a great reminder that AI can provide us some insight, but that's all it's ever doing. I don't think we'd ever say, outsource the giving of feedback to AI, for instance, for this exact reason, right? It would come back and tell me Tom does not know how to spell even basic words, cannot use basic punctuation, loves a semicolon when a full stop would do. It wouldn't get very far beyond that stuff when it looks at my writing. But the social learning, the cohorts, again, social learning, not a new idea, but I would love to hear a little bit about kind of like how, if you were sat inside an organization right now, thinking about your internal leadership initiatives, how would you go about thinking about how to create social learning spaces? Because again, it's one of those things where it's like, create a space and they'll just go to it, and thus Yammer happened, or rather Yammer didn't happen in most organizations. It was installed and then immediately abandoned. So how do you not do Yammer but make something that's actually effective, as whether it's cohorts or whether it's a more reflective space or whatever it might be?
Wow, Yammer. Gosh, that's bringing back some painful memories. Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, it's amazing, right? Isn't it? You kind of, introduce online platform and no one wants to use it. Yeah, that's always really hard. You need to, I'm sure most people on this call would agree or know this, but you need to meet people where they are. I mean, we can implement new tools, but actually if you can interrupt something that already exists, kind of be part of a routine that's already there, it's going to be a lot easier because you're not, trying to kind of force something new. I mean, something I did at a previous company with these kind of, it's going to sound really cheesy, this, but something like leadership moment. But like in a weekly meeting, you'd take turns, and like managers would kind of they'd be able to reflect on a challenge. So it might be a difficult conversation they've got to have, a decision they've got to make, and they feel under pressure. And then the group would really kind of, I guess, almost deconstruct what's going on and offer what they would do differently. And you just save 10 minutes at the end of every weekly meeting of your leadership team together, and then you just rotated each week and everyone got an option. So you're not introducing anything new, no one's got to find any additional time. Something like that can be quite easy to implement. I think even the kind of, it's slightly outside of your like day-to-day practice stuff, but again, things like creating small leadership learning circles, or even just learner circles. You get learners together, and we run group coaching sessions within our cohort, and honestly, I think they're the best part of the program. I think people just having a facilitator to help them help each other is the most effective way to get through anything, to be honest. I don't know, people might get 20 minutes each. They share their challenge, and then everyone else kind of goes, well, this is what I do. Then you alternate, it's the next person. Those sorts of things are really easy, pretty cheap to set up. And they can just sort of happen quite naturally, really. People just talk about a challenge that they've got and their peers help them. So I think, yeah, I mean, obviously there's also great stuff that you can fit in to how people work, through playbooks to podcasts. Mentoring has always been amazing. I remember Tesco years ago introduced kind of reverse mentoring, and I thought, what a fantastic opportunity. We paired graduates with C-suite. And I think at the time, it was a time of kind of Yammer implementation and stuff, and a lot of our C-suite didn't know how to use Facebook. So the grads were teaching them how to use Facebook and Twitter and what on earth Yammer was. And then the team were using their experience in leadership and business management, which was amazing. So I think those sorts of things are really useful and quite practical too.
I think what really struck me there is that a lot of those approaches do not come with a massive price tag. They do not come with a need to buy another platform or a tool or build something. Like the 10 minutes in at the end of the meeting,
Yeah,
and an opportunity to have that discussion and move around the group. That is the kind of thing where you think, oh, setting up social learning, I'm going to need to persuade people to engage. I've got to create a space. I've got to give them something. I've got to persuade them. I've got to moderate it. 10 minutes, you're there anyway. 10 minutes,
yeah.
the end. And that's such a wonderfully simple but effective way that any organization can inject a little bit of social learning and support. Because I would have to assume that once that gets going in that weekly meeting or however often your meetings are, then you are going to build a little bit of community. You're going to see those managers go, oh, they gave really good advice. I'll reach out to them outside of the meeting precedent now because I want some help with something else.
Definitely. Definitely. And actually, that's what we're going to probably see that more internally in a company, because obviously our programs are a mix of loads of different heads of learning from different organizations. And that's actually quite hard to get everybody together to then do social learning. But interestingly, what we find is our cohorts meet up with each other outside of the program. And they just kind of get on with it. So, you introduce them and start making spaces for them to do things, and then they start kind of self-managing that. So yeah, I would say that is definitely an easy way to go, or easier.
Yeah, I mean, again, from the small medium organization perspective, if people can self-manage an initiative,
Yeah.
that's a winner. If we can set it up, get it started, and then step away, that and that's always scary, right? When we have to let it go and not control it anymore. But definitely, probably more realistically, it goes back to who are you to be training leaders. Quite often, I know I wouldn't now run leadership development training if I ever have a choice, and we don't do it as an organization for that reason. But then something like this would allow us to set up that program and then hand it over to those best informed on leadership within the organization, right? The people doing it day in, day out. That makes perfect sense. So we're coming into our last 7 minutes of our chat. Which is crazy. The time has flown by. Thank you all for being so active in the chat. If you've got like a burning question, something we haven't spoken about that you really want to dig into, now is the time to throw it into the chat. But Cathy, I guess one of the things that I always like to ask is that classic kind of, if I was getting started, what should I be thinking about? But I'd like to somewhat double up on that. I'd like to ask you two things. One, if I'm just getting started, if I've been told leadership development training, it's your responsibility, get to it, which, let's face it, is often how these things start. What's the thing that you said, this is where you want to start? This is the first thing you should be thinking about. But also, what's the one thing you would avoid doing, just as an immediate, oh, I'll go do that?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to ask why. I think we have to do that. I think it's so common still, I think, in L&D, because I think we're generally made up of people that want to please as well. Then it's really easy to say, absolutely, I'm on it, I can do that. You've got a lot of kind of prover pleasers, I think, in the L&D community. And the first thing, so it's not necessarily a challenge, it's so that you understand more about why it needs to happen and what metrics you're looking to move as a result of the leadership training. So I think that probably would be a first thing to do. Avoid, I don't know if this is, I'm going to phrase it as an avoid. I think people spend a lot of time thinking they've got to make it perfect before they do it. And it was good to see, I think it was Aaron earlier talking about piloting something. I think nothing's to be perfect at all. I think you just need to start getting things out there. I think everybody thinks this is not just about training. This is, I think, in every walk of life, we feel like stuff's got to go perfect before we kind of go out there with it. But if you can just start small groups of little things and see what's working, get someone trialing the, leadership challenges at the end of a meeting, get someone else trying group coaching, get somebody else doing this, and this, and just see what works and what goes down well and what's actually moving the, what's kind of moving the dial really for business performance and metrics. And then you start to see what's working. So you can kind of, pull some of those things together and gradually kind of bundle it together in some form of initiative or solution really. But I think just go with it. don't kind of wait until it's perfect, but always understand why you're doing it. Just always push back, find the business reason for doing it and what metrics you're trying to move.
Amazing. Well, some really, really great advice there for any of us facing that situation when we're asked to take this on. Cathy, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today, sharing all this knowledge with us. If people want to ask more questions, connect with you, find out more, where's the best place for them to do that?
So you can do that on LinkedIn. More than welcome to LinkedIn, or you can have a look at CLO100.com, and you can always contact us through that as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us in the audience, sharing your thoughts, experiences, challenging situations, asking such valuable questions. We will be back with another installment of the L&D Fix very soon with another exciting topic. But in the meantime, obviously, make sure you share this recording with all of your friends and family, which of course they'll be super interested in. In fact, share it with your colleagues and other poor people you have to inflict L&D stuff upon in their spare time. But as always, if you've got questions or things you'd like to see us explore in the future, please do reach out. We always want to make these sessions as useful as possible to the challenges that you're actually facing in the real world of work. But until next time, have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you again very, very soon.